I work as a valet at a casino in Atlantic City. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays well and it's fun. Who wouldn't want a taste of what it's like to drive a sweet-ass sports car they could never afford? Usually, my nights are pretty uneventful. I park the cars, walk back to the valet station, wait, walk back to the parking lot, and drive the cars back to their owners waiting at the entrance. If I'm lucky, my patron will reward me with a good tip. If my patron was unlucky, I'll get a scoff and the stink eye, as if it's somehow my fault they came out of the casino several $1,000s poorer. Worst is, I'm pretty sure it's more a question of bruised egos. The types that come into my casino consider a couple $1,000s to be pocket change. This isn't the place for down-on-their-luck alcoholic husbands looking to gamble their paychecks away. This is a place of expensive cars, flashy watches, fancy suits, old money, and men who think they own the world. And probably do. I never let any of that bother me. I've always just done my job and lived by the valet's cardinal rule. If we see something, we say nothing. Whether it be a sack of cocaine or evidence of a backseat orgy, we keep our mouths shut. Our job isn't to police or judge. It's simply to get the cars from point A to point B, which is literally just around the corner, but apparently too far for the rich folks to walk. Just like shrinks have doctor-patient confidentiality, we offer valet car confidentiality. The other night, I had to break that unofficial confidentiality agreement. And here's why. His name was Edward Smith, and yes, he looked just as pretentious as his name suggested. He showed up late at night with the shit-eating grin of a man who shops for wives based on bra sizes and waistlines. He had a small, busty woman on his arm who sported a massive diamond ring on her finger that blurred the lines between expensive and tacky, and who wore a leopard print dress so tight it might as well have been a skin suit. She looked 20 years younger, but every bit as entitled. Edward, on the other hand, had applied so much gel his hair looked like plastic. He had gone all out with diamond-studded cufflinks, and he wore a suit so perfectly tailored, it had probably been sewn directly onto him. Without a single glance in my direction, Mr. Smith tossed me his valet key and said, "Don't scratch her." Entitled asshole or not, he was a client, and I was going to be careful with his car. I always was. I opened the door and immediately caught a whiff of something strong. It was like a plume of lavender perfume had crashed over me like a tidal wave. I could taste it as it burned my nose and made my eyes water. It was so strong I had to open all the windows and hold my breath just to survive the short drive to the lot around the corner. I was distracted. I could barely see. Hell, I could even hear ringing in my ears as though I were sucking on a lemon. Just as the car came to a stop in its parking spot, I heard a thud coming from the back. Not a light thud either. A nice, strong thud that made the car bump. Shit, I cursed under my breath. I must have hit something. Something big. Something I hadn't seen through the veil of tears my eyes had been producing to wash out the perfume. I could just imagine roadkill crushed under the wheel, blood sprayed over the pristine gold paint job, and maybe even a nasty dent. It wasn't going to come out of my paycheck. The casino had insurance. But I was as good as fired. I resisted the urge to bash my head against the steering wheel out of frustration. I couldn't risk causing more damage, and lingered in the driver's seat as I tried to figure out how I was going to explain this to my boss. People don't hit animals in parking lots, driving at 5 miles per hour, with enough floodlights to light up a football stadium. That's just not something that happens. Another thud sent the car bouncing again. And this time, I was more scared than surprised because the thud followed by a very light, barely audible whimper. Oh shit, I whispered to myself. It was alive. I didn't know what to do. Back up, stay put? Drive over the cement strip and onto the grass? Was I going to have to put the poor creature out of its misery? As another bump rocked the car, I started to worry about how big it must have been to be able to shake the car in its injured state. Was it even safe to go outside? What if it was a coyote? What if it reared its head and bit me? A peek. I needed to sneak a peek of it, to know what it was before I proceeded. I opened the door and shuffled onto my stomach, careful not to scuff the leather interior. Edward would notice if I scuffed anything, and I'd be in twice as much trouble. Patrons always notice every little defect. They didn't notice when we took the liberty of throwing away used condoms or cigarettes forgotten on the driver's seat. But they definitely noticed if we so much as left a piece of lint behind. Once I was in position, I took a deep breath, braced myself to see some poor, eviscerated animal, and craned my neck down to look under the car. There was nothing there. Just 4 wheels on the pavement. No blood, no guts, no animal crawling away with half its body dragging behind it like some zombie. What the hell? I raced out of the car and bent down on all fours, scanning the wheels more thoroughly. I pushed myself to my feet and circled around the car. My attention split between trying to find the animal I had hit and checking for damage. The car looked as sparkly and as shiny as the day it had left the dealership, and there wasn't so much as a tuft of fur left behind. As I stood there, by the back right wheel, the car suddenly bounced, and I heard another whimper. The trunk, I realized. Somebody's in the trunk. I felt a mix of emotions. On the one hand, I was relieved I hadn't almost killed something. And on the other hand, the situation was suddenly much, much worse. See something. Say nothing. That was our cardinal rule. No matter what kind of shit we saw in those cars, we were not allowed to do anything. It wasn't our place. It wasn't my place. If I tried to help, they'd have my job, but... Nervously, I said, "Is anyone in there?" I heard what sounded like sobs as the car shook in response. I was right. "Just hang on! I'll get you out of there!" I ran around front and pulled the key from the ignition, then circled back to the trunk. I put the key in, turned right, turned left, turned right again. But the key didn't work. Of course it didn't work. That was the whole point of a valet key. Keeping the valet out of your stuff. Shit. I paced around back and forth, wondering what to do. That's when the thought occurred to me. Maybe Edward kept a spare key. I headed back inside the car and started searching the glove compartment and dashboard, hoping I'd find one. I found everything from a gold flask to a custom mahogany business card holder. But no key. Meanwhile, the car continued to bounce every so often, and the whimpers persisted. I sat on the curb, biting my nails as I pondered what to do. Risk my job by snitching to the cops, or simply just let it go. It wasn't too late. I could save my own neck. I could bury my head in the sand and convince myself this was some sort of fetish thing, and the person was totally into it. I could pretend nothing happened. But then again, how could I live with myself if I did that? So I grabbed my cell phone and called the police. The wait was unbearable. I spent my time trying to calm whoever was inside the trunk. I gave them my name and made one-sided small talk, even as the thuds grew weaker and the whimpers came to a stop. Finally, I saw the red and blue lights of a squad car turning into the parking lot. I flagged them down, but by then, the trunk had gone silent. They said something about just cause or probable cause or something they say all the time in those cop shows. Point being, they couldn't open the trunk just yet. They had the casino security track down Edward Smith, who showed up looking as sheepishly self-satisfied as he had earlier. This time with 3 women on his arm instead of just 1. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" he asked the policeman calmly. I could just barely hear the conversation from behind the squad car where I was giving my statement. The cops explained they suspected someone was being held against their will, and the slimy guy just smiled and shrugged. I have no idea where someone might have gotten that idea, he said. Would you please open the trunk, sir? Asked the officer. He smirked broadly, releasing the women in his arms. He shooed them away with a playful slap on the ass, then said, Why, of course, officer. You only need to ask. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his car key, not hesitating for a second to unlock the trunk and open it. I stretched my neck as far as it could go to see who was inside. But what I saw sent my stomach tumbling to my feet. The trunk was empty. Impossible, I whispered. I had heard them. I had felt the car bumping up and down from inside. I had seen it moving from the outside. My boss came out, face red with anger. I could tell he was about to scold me, probably fire me too. But Edward Smith stood between us and smiled. Now, I don't want you to do anything to him. He took good care of my car after all. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. I expect to see him here next time I visit, he said. He winked at me, a wink that made my skin crawl. My supervisor blundered out. Yes, of course. The police searched the car, then shot annoyed glances my way. I went home that night shaken by what had happened. I went through it in my head over and over again, but I just couldn't explain it. Was the car haunted? Had I felt an earthquake? Could lavender perfume make you hallucinate? A few weeks had passed, and I finally saw the car pulling up around the corner. At first, I thought it was him. I thought that entitled prick had come back to taunt me. But there was a bluish sheen to the paint, and the driver looked completely different. Just some random guy with the same exact car model as Edward. You know, this might sound weird, but even after weeks, I never forgot what Edward's trunk looked like. The image of the empty space stayed with me, nagging me every day. I could see it in my mind's eye so clearly that if I had any drawing skills whatsoever, I could have shown you exactly what it looked like in spectacular detail. The random patron with the same model car stepped out, but kept a hold of his key. He apologized as he ran around back to get something from his trunk. It was the same exact trunk. But then, I saw him reach around and pull a latch. The floor of the trunk retracted. There was a compartment underneath, just barely big enough to hold a person, if you broke a few bones and really crammed them in there. I promised them I'd get them out. I gave them false hope. And then I let them die.